corrupt activities, it is odious. It is unacceptable. If debt is used, as has been the case in Zimbabwe, we have spent huge amounts of money purchasing weapons from dubious places. That debt is also odious. We've also, if debt is actually acquired or used to repress people, to repress the citizen, to repress the population, that debt is also odious. And in the case of Zimbabwe, we have had situations where debt is actually acquired as a means of consolidating authoritarian hegemony within the framework of the nation state. That debt is actually also very odious. I was shocked this morning when I was preparing for my talk to actually discover that the consolidated debt of Zimbabwe now exceeds 19.5 billion US dollars officially, or 68.5% of gross domestic product. These figures are published in the conclusions of the IMF Article 4 report, which was published last week on the 24th of March 2022. So for a country like this to actually have 19 billion US dollars worth of debt, divide the debt to the population. You know, we are around 13 million people. We've got an external consolidated, the consolidated of 19 billion US dollars. So that means every child that is being born, that means that every one of you who is looking at me, if you are Zimbabwean, you owe from where you don't know at least 100,000 US dollars. And I know that some of you don't even have you know, I've been campaigning for a long time, so I was about to use language that we were, you know, so a lot of you don't, those of you who have been watching my videos, you know what I was about to say. So it's very unfair. It's extremely unfair that a child who's being born now, as I'm talking to you, has got a debt of 19 billion, or of $100,000, constituting the $19 billion. The PPI, the public and publicly guaranteed debt, PPG, is around 17 billion US dollars, which is around 62% of GDP. And the sources of this debt are worrying. Why are they worrying? They are worrying in the sense that there is a tiny little bit, there is a small percentage of debt that is being contracted, that is actually being contracted legally and in terms of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. The Constitution of Zimbabwe has got a tenuous provisions for debt contraction that allows Parliament to exercise oversight in terms of Section 298 and 299 of the Constitution. The Constitution has got an oversight role on debt in terms of its general mandate of oversight, spelled out in terms of Section 114 and Section 117 of the Constitution. The Constitution itself makes Parliament the watchdog over the Consolidated Revenue Fund. And any levy, any debt, any withdrawal, any charge on the Consolidated Revenue Fund cannot take place without approval of Parliament in terms of Section 302, Section 303, Section 305 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. That is why the Constitution of Zimbabwe obliges the Minister of Finance to do two things every year. The first one is to present an estimate of expenditure and revenue every year in terms of Section 305. That is called the budget. The second thing is to oblige the minister twice a year to actually present before Parliament a list of the debt that you would have acquired and contracted. Then we have got the important provision of Section 327, which obliges the President through the minister, to actually present before Parliament for prior approval, not post facto approval, for prior approval, details of any agreement that he would have signed. I was going to say he or she, I hope there will be a she soon. He or she would have signed, which exposes Zimbabwe's to indebtedness. But of course, that has not been happening. So where is the debt coming from? And I'm going to highlight the debt assumptions that have taken place that have clearly been illegal. In 2015, we had the RBZ Debt Assumption Act of 1.5 billion US dollars. A lot of that debt consisted of quasi-fiscal activities of the Reserve Bank that were conducted during the meltdown years. And during the meltdown years, because of programs such as Bakosi, programs such as Flores, the farm mechanization program, the footprint of the Reserve Bank had become disproportionate to the size of the economy. At some stage, the footprint of the RBZ in the economy was as high as 45%. So effectively, the Reserve Bank had become the government, had become the Ministry of Finance, has become a fiscal authority on its own. So that's 1.5 billion US dollars. Now the problem about the RBZ, and which is why some of us advocate that the RBZ must actually be closed. Zimbabwe actually doesn't need an RBZ. If we want to retain our own currency, then let's adopt a currency board. It is because the Reserve Bank has never attended to its core business. It loves displacing the Ministry of Finance. So you have got $1.5 billion in 2015. In the 2022 budget, in the 2022 Finance Act approved by Parliament in December of 2021, there was sneaked again another debt assumption from the RBZ, this time of 3.5 billion US dollars, representing blocked funds. But nobody can piece the corporate veil. Nobody can tell what is behind that 3.5 billion US dollars. And when you now piece the corporate veil, as some of us have done, you actually find shenanigans, illegal activities, extra legal activities that are done outside parliamentary scrutiny, that are then imposed on the people of Zimbabwe without public scrutiny. And I object very strongly, and I suspect it's one of the reasons why I was chucked out of Parliament. The Finance Act is a tax act. It is only supposed to deal with the revenue measures that a minister will be taking. So if you want to increase duty, if you want to increase the taxes, that's the purpose of a Finance Act. But they've used the Finance Act, or rather, they've abused the Finance Act to push into it things that require stand-alone bills that will be subjected to the public in terms of Section 141 of the Constitution, so that the public is consulted, the public can debate. So if you consider 2015, the RBZ, the initial RBZ debt bill of $1.5 billion, it was a stand-alone act which the Portfolio Committee on Budget and Finance took to the public to debate. And the public said, look, you are asking us to assume the dates of those who benefited from the farm mechanization program. These people are supposed to be farmers. Why then do they pay the debt themselves? Because they've been farming. That's what the public said. So there was a total rejection of the 2015 RBZ public debt bill. Now, given that experience, instead of having a standalone independent second RBZ debt assumption bill of 3.5 billion US dollars, they sneaked it into an act which does not permit for public consultation, the Finance Act. Remember, there are reasons why the Finance Act is consulted. The Minister of Finance can't consult the public about increasing taxes or not. It's a unique function. It's a sui generis function. So they are now using a unique act defined for revenue measures. You don't announce revenue measures to the public. because Matsotano reactor. So can you imagine announcing to the public that you are going to increase the excise duty on alcohol on the 1st of January 2021? All the bottle stores will empty because that was not, take at all. The same thing applies to fuel. So the Finance Act is a unique act. It's a sui generis act. It's not subjected to public scrutiny. That all bills are subjected in terms of Section 141 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. So by abusing the Public Finance Management Act, they deny the public the obligation to scrutinize the $3.5 billion. One of the things that is in this that was sneaked in the Public Finance Act are the debts that were bought by the reserve banks through ZAMCO, the Zimbabwe Asset Management Company. So what ZAMCO did, ZAMCO spent over $2 billion purchasing non-performing loans from commercial banks like CBZ, Agribank, and other banks. Now, what is a non-performing loan? A non-performing loan is a debt contracted by an individual at a bank who fails to pay his loan. Now, my brothers and sisters, why should I, John Lotito, why should Mary Brown in Senga, why should my beauty in Chedambuya, why should Mrs. Move in Cholocho pay the debt of Mr. X who has defaulted on his own? I mean, it's just ridiculous. It's just unconscionable. And if you look at that ZAMCO, the list of ZAMCO, it reads like a who is who of ZANU-PF elites. There are ministers there, there are presidents there, there are speakers of parliaments there on that ZAMCO list. And so why should we, the ordinary Wananji, the ordinary citizen, pay credit Jevana? And when you look at that ZAMCO list, Yemashef, I remember when we were kids, taituka musoro wakazviva nezvikwereti. Musoro wakazviva nezvikwereti are the individuals on the ZAMCO list. But why should the ordinary person be settled with the debts of ZAMCO, of elites, of chefs, of the already super rich in our society? So in other words, the pattern of debt assumptions in Zimbabwe are hiding omissions and commissions and illegalities that would never pass the scrutiny of Parliament. And the Parliament then suddenly found itself burdened with an assumption that has not been subjected to scrutiny, that has not been subjected to respect of Zimbabwe's laws. So that's the $3.5 billion from the Reserve Bank over and above the $1.5 billion US. And this actually illustrates my point that the Reserve Bank has been at the center of an overheated fiscal policy, has been at the center of overprinting money to finance an expansive fiscal policy and also to finance illicit borrowing, illicit lending. And over the years, it is imposed unnecessary and unsustainable and unaffordable fiscal obligations on the people of Zimbabwe, such that it is serving no useful purpose in Zimbabwe. I want to come to another third area of debt assumption, which the Reserve Bank has been at the center of. This is treasury bills. As of the 19th of February 2019, just a day before the President of Zimbabwe enacted SI 33 of 2019, which introduced a new currency, the RTGS dollar, which created this artificial exchange rate of 1:1. The total domestic debt in Zimbabwe and the total stock of treasury bills was $12 billion US. $12 billion US. So the Reserve Bank had borrowed from the people of Zimbabwe using treasury bills $12 billion US. So the following morning, when the people of Zimbabwe woke up, If you were holding a treasury bill, let's say of $1 billion US, its hair had been cut. It was now a treasury bill of RTGS $1 billion. And the Supreme Court of Zimbabwe, through Chief Justice Malaba, in the case of A.N. Baba, called Zambezi, said, yes, it's correct. If you had $1 billion US, you are now holding RTGS $1 billion. And of course, businesses suffered because that money would have been, and that debt would have been acquired through lawful commercial transactions. But what was these treasury bills? A huge part of these treasury bills were financing command agriculture. But command agriculture is a national obligation. Any farming obligation is a national obligation which must be funded through the budget, which must be funded by the Minister of Finance through the budget. And members of parliament must approve or disapprove that budget when they approve the estimates of expenditure and revenue by the minister in terms of section 304 and 5 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. But you and I know from the reports that we did as Public Accounts Committee, including a report that I prepared but was later produced after I had been fired only a few weeks ago on command agriculture. $2.7 billion was spent in 2017 on command agriculture. $3.5 billion was spent on command agriculture in 2018. $6.8 billion was spent on command agriculture in 2019. I don't know the figure for 2020. I'm told it is out, and I will be looking forward to those figures, particularly now that the citizens of Harare East saw it fit to return me back to Parliament. It's one of the things that I can't wait to lay my hands on and to question the authorities on why they've been breaking the law. So now look at this, look at the iniquity. The 2017 budget was $3 billion. But over and above $3 billion in illegally and outside parliament, $2.7 billion was spent. The 2018 budget was $4 billion. But outside parliament and over and above the $3.5 billion, $3.5 billion was also spent on command agriculture. What does it mean now? What it means is that the authorities, particularly through the Reserve Bank, particularly through treasury bills, are running a shadow ghost parallel budget. So Parliament pretends to sit and pass a budget every December, but there's another budget that is run somewhere. But this budget that is illegal, some years later, you and I are then forced to adopt it, are then forced to assume it through the dubious shenanigans of debt assumption mechanisms. So in short now, when you ask me in your question, where's the piece of paper again? You say debt assumption is a catalyst for debt distress in Zimbabwe. No, it's not a catalyst for debt distress. It's a catalyst for a coup. It's a catalyst for a parallel government. It's a catalyst for illegality. Because they are running a parallel government through these debt assumptions that are then foisted on the ordinary people of Zimbabwe. And command agriculture is a principal vehicle. So it's no longer about distress. Distress is when your football team loses, Dynamos has lost to one. That's a distress. This is not a distress. This is an illegality. This is a coup. Because Parliament controls the Consolidated Revenue Fund. But Parliament has been rendered useless. Parliament is pretending to be active. Parliament is sleeping all night. When you pass the budget, you sleep all night. That's a waste of time. That's a waste of time. A waste of energy. Because Canada, you run the actual parallel budget, which over post the break to the official budget. Then you also know, ladies and gentlemen, that we've got another bill, which we have not approved, but which we are going to approve, which is the Financial Adjustment Bill of 2019. You remember that one? Do you remember that? I'm not familiar here, but you must read. There is no excuse for not reading. So what happened? I don't know why I saw who said it, but you should read. So in 2019, the government of Zimbabwe came up with a financial adjustment bill of 10.6 billion US dollars, in which they sought condonation of expenditure that they spent outside Parliament between 2015 and 2018 in the sum of 10.6 billion US dollars. So I was still chairing the Public Accounts Committee, and I said, no, but you can't ask us to condone before you have given us a breakdown of the schedules of what actually was spent within the 10.6 billion US dollars. But can you imagine if a government in 3 years has to spend 10.6 billion US dollars outside what has been approved by Parliament? So what it means is that we actually have a rogue government. We actually have a criminal government that has no respect of the Constitution, that has no respect for Parliament, because 10.6 billion US dollars in this economy is a huge amount of money. Next, you have got debt assumption in the form of the US $3.5 billion for farmers. Now the Constitution is very clear that farmers will be paid for improvements, number one. Number two, that an act of parliament, I think it's section 332, an act of parliament must define the formula, the valuation method that is going to be used to carry out the valuation. But without that act, the government went on and signed an agreement with farmers for 3.5 billion US dollars. Now, the ordinary average Zimbabwean such as yourself is entitled to ask, who are the actual farmers who are benefiting? Number two, what is the equipment or the improvements that we are compensating? Number three, what is the valuation method that we have used? Number five, where is the schedule? Because in that $3.5 billion, we should see figures. We should see 3.5 billion broken down as follows: tractors, so and so, equipment, so and so, irrigation, so and so, so and so, so and so. Because during the time of the land reform program, and all the way from 1980 until 14th November 1997, Zimbabwe actually had a stable currency. We were not subject to the exchange volatility and exchange rate shocks that we are now having. And for a long time, the Zimbabwean currency had a steady exchange rate of 1:15 until Black Friday, the 14th of November 1997, when our currency collapsed by 70% as a result of the misadventure of the war in the DRC and the payout that had been made to war veterans in 1997. So our currency collapsed. So when you measure now, when you apply a steady exchange rate on these farms that were being bought for 30,000, 20,000, the cost of compensating the land itself should be around 3.5 billion. So how can the cost of improvements also be 3.5 billion? Do you understand what I'm saying? Masofa, akafanana here nemba. Do you understand what I'm saying? The value of your flat screen television and your sofas inside your house can't be equivalent to the actual value of the house. So what they've done is that under the guise of compensating for improvements, they are in fact compensating for the value of the land. That is why no one is prepared to tell us what valuation method you have used. But the point I'm making here is simple. That assumption is being used to break the law. That assumption is being used to cover up for the law. That assumption is being used to override parliament. That assumption is being used to cover up for illegalities. That assumption is being used to cover up for corruption. And therefore we should say no to that assumption. So the Public Debt Management Act should be strengthened to say no. Another form of illicit debt contraction, which is resulting in debt assumption, are the guarantees that the government is giving to private companies. In 2020, when COVID arose, the government issued a lot of guarantees to the private sector. But why should the government issue guarantees to the private sector? You are a Majgira. You are Mof, you are running your company. Why should the citizens of Zimbabwe guarantee your own debt? I mean, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So that's another form of then yields, agricultural indebtedness. A lot of debt is being contracted through agro instruments, agro yields, and I know that ZIMCODD is trying to file some court applications to challenge that. So guarantees are illegal, but they are also contributing to this debt hazard. Another form of debt assumption, and over $2 billion has been assumed this way, are the debt of parastatals. National Railways of Zimbabwe, I believe around $495 million assumed. But why is the National Railways of Zimbabwe collapsed? The National Railways of Zimbabwe has collapsed because of inefficiency, because of corruption, because of mismanagement. So when the government assumes that huge debt, it is sanitizing inefficiency, it is sanitizing corruption, it is sanitizing shady deals. But why should the taxpayer pay for shady deals, pay for corruption, pay for mismanagement, pay for incompetence? Because what we did in this parastatal was that we let our relatives run them without qualifications, without the requisite skills. So, debt assumption, Grey Marketing Board, debt assumption, National Railways of Zimbabwe, debt assumption, Civil Aviation Authority of Zimbabwe, debt assumption, Net1, debt assumption, Ten1, debt assumption, ZESA. When you unpack that debt assumption, when you unpack that debt that is being, there are three things that are appearing there: mismanagement and incompetence. 2, political shenanigans. Over the years, parastatals have actually been used to fund political campaigns of persons. So, when I was in government, in Minister of Finance, and they approached me with the RPZ debt assumption, which was then introduced after I was gone with 1.5 billion. I said, authentic sovereign debt, there were some debts that the RPZ actually contracted, which were legitimate. For instance, there were debts in respect of fuel that Zimbabwe had purchased from Malawi, around $20 million, and another debt for fuel from the Equatorial Guinea. Those were sovereign. I said, the Minister of Finance, subject to compliance with the Constitution, subject to parliamentarians approving that, we can assume. But then there were debts owed to individuals. If you go to that list, even there's one law firm there which is owed $2 million. I'm a lawyer. What kind of a bill do you raise in this economy that is $2 million? What kind of debt? And I'm a very experienced lawyer as well as family. So what kind of debt can you raise that is $2 million? So I said, for these debts now that are now dubious, let's appoint a curator. Let's appoint a curator. And this curator must answer 2 things. Number 1, was this debt contracted legally in terms of the laws? 2, is this debt actually legitimate? In other words, was a service actually rendered? In the case of the legal bill that I've spoken of, lawyers, were we have got what is called a bill of tax. In other words, you prove before a tax master, before an independent person, that you actually did the work. So if it's a divorcee action, you can't charge 20,000. You have to prove that you actually phoned Mrs. So you actually went to the High Court. So I demanded the curator, I demanded the trustee to go through this stage. So my proposal here is that before any debt assumption takes place, there must be a curator. And all debt contraction must be done in the context of an independent act of parliament. All debt must be done in the context of an independent act of parliament, so that parliament lays the rules, appoints the curator itself. And this curator must look at three things. Number one, the legalities of the transaction. Because if you're contracting with the government, you must know that parliamentary approval is required. Then the two, the authenticity of the transaction. Then three, the performance of the transaction. If you are secunda and you argue that in the context of command agriculture, you bought things that are $2 billion, prove that you actually bought fertilizer and seeds as opposed to SUVs for the ships. In a few years' time, another RPZ debt assumption is going to come. This assumption is going to ask the citizens of Zimbabwe to assume the debt that the RPZ is occurring as a result of the Dutch auction system that they are running. So every week they are disbursing around $40 million to individuals who would have bid and acquired foreign currency on the Dutch auction system. But the Dutch auction system has become a cesspool of corruption. Individuals are raising multiple, dubious individuals are raising multiple shelf companies who are proceeding to bid. And people are becoming super rich in Zimbabwe out of doing nothing. They've got relatives at Zimra, so Zimra will stamp fictitious invoices. They've got relatives at the RPZ, and RPZ officials will stamp fictitious acquittals, MCTs and NCT1. The RPZ cannot afford an outlay of $40 million a week. They are stealing that money from someone. But one day soon, you and I, ordinary citizens, Wananchi, are going to be foisted on yet another debt assumption bill to pay for the lifestyles of thieves and their mistresses. You call them small houses. In Swahili, we call them nyumba dogo. How can we pay for someone's nyumba dogo? Brother comes from Malawi. What you call the small houses in Malawi? What you call them? Small houses. Oh, Malawi people are dangerous. So let me conclude, ladies and gentlemen, and say that that assumption is pernicious. That assumption is unconstitutional. That assumption is a cover-up for corruption. That assumption is a cover-up for illegalities. That assumption is abusing parliament. That assumption is legalizing the existence of a parallel government. Therefore, legislative measures must be taken to ensure that it doesn't happen. In civil society, you are activists here. You must also be proactive. These are the real fights you must be engaged in. These are the real fights you must be engaged in. I thank you very much. Thank you. Oh yes, I can do that in the
Thank you very much, Mr. Biti. It's a hashtag no to debt assumption, isn't it? The debt justice movement. Maybe if you can take 3 questions before he leaves, so that we move on to another review.
Thank you very much. Well, my question was, what efforts have been made by Parliament, or how useful has been, or how deliberate has been Parliament in attempting to at least repeal the Data Sanctions Act?
Thank you very much, Honorable Biti. The irony of the matter then from your presentation is that quite frankly, we all then conclude that Parliament is not useful in any way. Because if you said Granada that are running a parallel government are there, why then should you waste national resources in the context of indebtedness to conduct elections that elect people like you and others? It's not personal to Parliament. So, what is the strategic use of Parliament? The Constitution, Chapter 8 establishes Parliament, if I'm not mistaken. But what is the strategic value or use of this Parliament if you, as you say, we have a parallel government that is in operation in this country? Where are we going? We need to utilize the Parliament, or we need to find alternatives to Parliament as citizens, create our own Parliament, and then deal with the Granada as you put it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I've listened to your presentation. It's more of no to debt assumption, and giving some historical background of that position. But all the same, from you, Mr. Biti, could you just give the other side of the story, looking at certain things which are beyond human control, like disasters, drought, and those other unexpected challenges we face as a nation, as another cause to adopt or accept debt assumptions. I know it may sound very difficult, but to have a balance on our historical experiences as a nation, that we went through certain experiences which were beyond our control. Hence, we talk about debt assumption. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biti, for the insightful presentation that we have just presented. But as communities, we are very much worried about that debt, which is acquired to fund non-developmental programs. Because what we see at community level does not portray the 3 billion debt that the government of Zimbabwe has incurred over the years. Where does this money go to? When we look at it, we have got so many vast mineral resources around our communities, but we are not sure where is that money going to. And as communities, we expect answers from our members of parliament, as we believe they play an oversight role. So, for someone who's down there in Kafusi, Rwanda, wouldn't agree with you that your efforts or your oversight role has been compromised by the system that is there. So we need answers on these issues as communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Biti, for the quite informative presentation. My name is Zimbabwe. So as you were presenting, as a young person, I was just challenged to say that as young as I am, I've been born so the historical background, was just is just provoked me. And just like the previous speaker was saying, to say where does this money go to when we are born and growing up, seeing no change, no tangible developmental programs. So my question as a young person to you is, what can you advise us, maybe specifically as young people, to do in order to address the debt issue? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The first question was on the, if I should stand. The first question was on the Public Debt Management Act. I believe that the Public Debt Management Act needs an overhaul. Number one, let's define in clear terms the relevant thresholds for both external debt and for domestic debt. Number two, I think let's say I'm very much against deficit financing. I'm very much against the budget deficits, which is why when I was Minister of Finance, my mantra or motto was, we eat what we kill. If we kill a rat, we eat a rat. We can't kill a rat and eat an elephant. That is the problem. And in developmental economics, 1 minus 2 is not equal to minus 1. Once you see 1 minus 2 equal to minus 1, you've got a problem. 1 minus 2, it can't. You know, the simple women out there, our mothers, Tito in Zimbabwe and Kai in Cholocho, knows that if my husband earns $200, I spend $200. If I spend $400 when my husband earns $200, something is going to happen. Either my husband is going to commit a crime, or my daughter or my son is going to commit a crime, including prostitution. So if economics 1 minus 2, it counts. So I believe that we need to limit the capacity of the government to borrow and to contract debt to a certain extent, and 3% of GDP, but we should do that. Number 4, I think the Minister of Finance powers to be the sole contracting debt office on behalf of the President needs to be curtailed. Let's make it in conjunction with Parliament, so that he can issue treasury bills like confetti, as has been the case between 2014 and now. I think that must stop. So that should go. That he can issue a guarantee to any person that he wants. One of the things we are trying to deal with is the guarantee and the tax exemptions that he gave to a company called GDI, Great Dike Investments. What criteria? So the capacity of the minister to issue discretionary favors that have the effect of accumulating debt for Zimbabwe must be curtailed. It must be done away with. So in short, my brother, the Public Debt Management Act needs a complete overhaul. Number 2, I think the Public Debt Management Act, including the Public Finance Management Act, we need to set the record straight with regards to parastatals. Parastatals are business organizations. But there are certain parastatals that carry out a public duty. You know, like your zinas, they provide water. So those ones know that they are doing a public service. So there must be a separate mechanism of dealing with their budget. The budget must fund that. But why should we assume the debt of the National Railways of Zimbabwe, a commercial outfit, of Net1, a commercial outfit, of 10-1, a commercial outfit? So surely we should accept, we should prescribe that 0. So again, the law needs to be strengthened so that that doesn't happen. So in short, there is massive requirements, massive legal reform that is required. The elephant in the living room is the Reserve Bank. And under John Panonetsa, it has become a rogue institution. In my respectful opinion, the country actually doesn't need a Reserve Bank. Let's have a currency board. Because all it does is to dabble in quasi-fiscal activities, which cost you and I. In the last 4 years, we've had 2 debt assumptions, $1.5 billion in 2015 and $3.5 billion in December of 2021. That's not good enough. That's a rogue central bank. So if they are incapable of repenting, then you must do something. If they are incapable of Damascus moments, then we must do something. And doing something is drastic. The country doesn't need a central bank. It needs a currency. Board. Parliament is useful. Only in Athens do citizens have direct democracy, where you would all go in a square and you all speak and you all vote. But you can't have direct representation in a population of 14 million. So our democracy is a representative democracy. We elect representatives. It's a representative democracy. And it's functioning. Me and my friends wrote a book on Democracy Works, because democracy does work. Yes, it has its limitations, poor parliaments, captured institutions, captured parliaments, but there is no better alternative to democracy. There is no cheaper alternative to democracy. The opposite of democracy is chaos, lawlessness, coups, predation, rogue states, and authoritarian regime. The point which you need to make is that how do we strengthen parliament? And parliament can only be strengthened by you, the citizens, who help what they are doing. I was chair of the Public Accounts Committee. We came up with so many recommendations. None of you in this room, if 5 of you have read our Public Accounts Committee reports, I'll change my name to John Lotito. I don't think so. I don't think so. So the problem is also a population that is not buoyant enough. A population that is not equal to the task as well, the task of democratic, because democracy lies with the citizen. It doesn't, start with the representative you send to parliament. It starts with you. Are you awake? Are you buoyant? And I don't think we've gotten to that stage. I like South Africans. In South Africa, around 4,000 demonstrations take place every year. They go on the streets, they assert their rights. In South Africa, you see a demonstration, you join it, and you say, why are we in this demonstration? They say, it's for water. Okay, that's fine. That's a strong society. In other countries, they've got traditions of town hall meetings. Councillors are called to town hall meetings. And members of parliament are called to town hall meetings, and so forth. Here in Zimbabwe, an MP is an ATM. An MP can be an ATM. He's your representative. Ask him why there's a refuse, why there's a pothole, why you allowed that bill of $3.5 billion to be passed. They must fear us. Our MPs must fear us, not the other way around. And so the onus is on the citizen. The citizen must be at the forefront of an assertive institution, of an assertive society. But it's not just parliament that needs to be strengthened. The judiciary itself needs to be strong and independent. The press needs to be strong and buoyant. Civil society needs to be strong. The ZIMCODD of this world, the Afro-Dat of this world, the Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, the NGO Human Rights Forum. You are under attack right now by a pernicious PVO Act. I would have thought that you'd be asked us to join you in demonstrations to assert your rights. Yes, it's okay to go to lawyers like myself, but it's not good enough. And for me to stand in court with a powerful petition, the most powerful petition is what the judge can see outside his office, that there are women putting on miniskirts who have come to threaten to undress in front of my office. You understand? That's what happens in other societies. So don't say Parliament is weak. Parliament is a reflection of you. If you are weak, Parliament is also weak. You can't expect Parliament to be stronger than you, because you send it there. You send it there. So you are the problem. The citizen, the manager. My brother asked me to implicitly persuade me that there are other legitimate emergency situations that make debt contraction inevitable, like disasters and so forth. I dispute vehemently. I dispute. Firstly, the legacy debt that I was talking about, NRZ, farmers, etc. There's no emergency there. There's no emergency there. There's no emergency. Secondly, when you have an emergency like a drought, you are allowed as a Minister of Finance to go and ask for a supplementary budget before Parliament. So there's no excuse for breaking the law at all. There is no excuse for breaking the law at all, because the law itself is designed to cater for the unexpected. It is mechanism to cater for the unexpected. Our constitution, for instance, actually allows the government to function without parliamentary budget for a period of at least 3 months. So that's the emergency catering. You understand? So whether we have a drought, cyclone Idai, cyclone Gilbert, I see they're not giving them indigenous names. Cyclone Zavaira, there is no justification of breaking the law at all. Because the minister can always go before parliament and ask for a supplementary budget to avoid shenanigans. Besides, when we have a drought like the terrible one we have this year, the international community also gets mobilized. The World Food Programme, UNICEF, and all other human agencies, there are always people to help. So in my respectful submission, there is no excuse for breaking the law at all. The fourth question he asked me, where is the money going? Go to Semlevis village, the money is going to SUVs, Mercedes-Benz, Toyota Land Cruisers, whatever. The money is going to the mansions that they are building, in hills that science thought you couldn't build houses, not to factories. I was very concerned with this IMF report which says, construction is in the boom in Zimbabwe. Construction is not in the boom. Have you ever seen a crane in Zimbabwe? But here's what is being built are mansions for Nyumba Dogus and whatever, in Shawasha Hills, in Uminsdale, in Glenlawn, in Borodale, and so forth. You know what I'm talking about. So there's consumerism, consumption for the sake of consumption. There is primitive accumulation in Zimbabwe. Look at the cars that they drive. Go to St. Levis village. If you see any expensive car in Zimbabwe, you must know it's a minister, or the wife of a minister, or the mistress of a minister. And that is true. That is true. So, my mom, that's where our money is going. Some of it is in Dubai, some of it is in Shanghai, some of it is in Hong Kong, a lot of it is in Mauritius. A lot of it is in Mauritius. That's where our money is going. And we know this country has got 64 minerals. It's a rich country. We've got world-class deposits of platinum, world-class deposits of diamonds, world-class deposits of chrome, world-class deposits of gold. US $1 billion worth of gold is being smuggled out of Zimbabwe. Botswana is a mono mineral economy. Botswana is built on diamonds. Francistown is irrecognizable. It's like London. Cameroon is irrecognizable because the Botswanas are putting their resources to good use. We suffer from the Dutch disease, the Dutch case. Starvation in the sea of plenty. We are suffocating of minerals plenty, but we are poor. Even I, former Minister of Finance, I have no money in my pocket because people are stealing. It's corruption, and that is the problem. My sister, you asked me, so what needs to be done? I've answered that question. A buoyant civic society, a strong civic society, backed by strong institutions, particularly strong judiciary, strong anti-corruption commission, strong independent prosecuting office, strong police force, strong civic society. Also the political question has to be resolved. Citizens must feel that if we choose Mrs. X to be our leader, then Mrs. X must deliver. That way, the elites are afraid of people. The elites must be afraid of people. The elites must be accountable. The citizen must hold elites to account. Unfortunately, in Zimbabwe, the electorate doesn't matter. It's the electorate that matters. And as long as we have a situation where the electorate matters more than the electorate, then we have a problem. So, cry the beloved country. But you are a young person, so the future is in bright hands because 69% of our people are youth, and I hope they can stand up to the iniquities and injustices that are being committed in Zimbabwe. I thank you very much.